Hello, my name is Drace Ryder, and I am the Vice President of the Boys and Girls Club of the Pikes Peak region. First off, just want to say thank you guys for being here tonight. So good to have you on. So good to see your faces. Welcome back to those of you that have been participating monthly, and then welcome to any new attendees. We're glad to have you. First off, I'd like to start by saying thank you to USAA for their commitment to advancing racial equity and awarding us a grant that has allowed us to create this initiative called Conversations That Count. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce a couple people. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Regina Lewis. She's a well-known consulting partner, international speaker, virtual moderator, and CEO of Regina Speaking LLC. Dr. Lewis has proven specialty in leadership, professional excellence, cultural inclusion, entrepreneurship, executive coaching, strategic development, and executive public speaking coaching. Regina holds a doctorate in educational leadership, research and policy, a Master of Arts in Communication, a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology. Regina's work in the area of diversity and inclusion has become an award-winning program. So with no further ado, we'd like to introduce Dr. Regina Lewis.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm happy to see those returning faces. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Gianina Horton, and Gianina is the executive director of the Denver Justice Project. And she's going to be with us tonight, really talking about constitutional rights, really important topic. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Regina. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. I'm super excited. I haven't ran a lyric presentation in a couple of months, and so I may be a little rusty, but I'm like dusting off my presentation boots here to make sure that I could provide you the best presentation around constitutional rights as possible. So just as a raise of hands, how many of you have had an encounter with law enforcement? Positive, negative, doesn't matter. You just have talked to law enforcement before. Yeah. And thank you for raising your hand. Yeah. Okay. So at a raise of hands, how many of you knew what to do when you were talking to law enforcement? Raise of hands. Some of you, kind of, sort of. All right. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to go through the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments and how they apply to us when we're encountering law enforcement, whether that's on the streets, whether that's in our schools, whether that's in our homes, right? Our constitutional rights apply to all of us. So before I get into that, I want to introduce an individual who's shadowing me, but is part of LYRIC, which is the organization that I'm representing today, Learn Your Rights in Colorado. So Stephanie, can you just introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Wise. I am a law student at the University of Denver.
Thank you, Stephanie. So LYRIC is, again, it stands for Learn Your Rights in Community. It's an organization that was developed a couple years ago when a couple defense attorneys were really tired of seeing their clients come into the courtroom, not understanding what happened and what went wrong during their encounter with law enforcement. And so they decided to create this curriculum to talk about the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments in a way that would prepare students and prepare young people to deal with police officers out on the streets, in their homes, or in our schools. And so today we're going to jump right in. Do I have any questions before we jump into the presentation? All right, just wanted to check in with y'all. So let me share my screen. All right. Thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay, great. That's what I love about Zoom culture is bringing back the thumbs up. Like, it's now cool to do it. So know your rights, and it's really about how to safely exercise your rights when confronted by police officers. And safety is going to be our #1 priority in this conversation. And we're going to go over 5 phrases that you're going to want to say when you're encountering a police officer, that these are your way of exercising your constitutional rights, clearly articulating them to the police officer. And this is all underneath the guise of safety. So before we go into the presentation, I do want to show a video here where we'll be able to see the constitutional rights from the perspective of poetry and the way it was developed. So let me make sure I have my sound on. So give me a second here.
I want a degree, but still need to work.
All right, everyone can hear and see the YouTube presentation. Thumbs up. Okay.
There's no sound.
Oh, there's no sound. Okay, thank you guys. All righty, give me a second. Share sound. All right, let's try that again.
To the youth of Denver, let's write a love letter to our voices.
My voice is a canyon.
My voice is the sun itself.
My voice is power.
My voice is action.
To hear my voice is a privilege.
To use my voice is the greatest choice.
But my silence, oh, my silence is deafening.
My silence is an action too.
When I speak,
I am brilliant, I am safe, I am secure.
When I am silent,
I am brilliant. I am safe. I am secure.
So when a siren sounds,
And the fear sets in.
My voice is the invitation of my own safety.
I not only want to be safe,
but commit myself to keep my safety mine.
my voice is the invocation.
And the spell is this.
am I free to leave?
If I am free, I will leave.
I choose to remain silent.
I want a lawyer.
I do not consent to the search of my body.
I do not consent to the search of my things.
Our voice is our right.
Our voice is our right.
Our voice is our right.
our voice is our right,
The choice to speak or remain silent.
is an act of love.
I love my voice, so I choose my voice.
90% of youth waive their right to silence without even knowing what it means to do so, without understanding the choice. If we protect ourselves, we prioritize our voice, we prioritize our strength.
In order to invoke your rights,
You have to find your voice.
Let's find it and use it together.
All right, so for those who were able to hear the sound, and I know that there were some struggles for some folks, what really resonated with you with that video and that poem?
I think the fact that we all have a voice.
And what's the power of that voice? What does that mean?
Regina wrote into the chat the choice how to use my voice.
How to use your voice. Exactly, Regina. Thank you. So this is all about making sure that when it comes to the power dynamics between a young person and an officer out on the streets, that the power is in law enforcement hands. However, we have the power of our voice to be able to exercise our constitutional rights in a way that keeps us safe. And safety is the #1 priority of this presentation and of our expectations of how an encounter with law enforcement should go if you're ever in that situation. And I just also want to state that it's important that regardless of your immigration status, whether you're here undocumented, whether you're a green card holder, whether you're an asylum seeker, that the Constitution applies to you, that the Constitution applies to everyone within the United States, regardless of immigration status. And so that is really important to bring up because so many of our communities that are undocumented live in fear, right, of the police officers, of federal ICE agents. And so it's important to know that the constitutional rights apply to each and every one of us, and that these phrases that we provide to you throughout today are essential to your safety and to get home safe. And so youth have the same rights as adults, except for there are a few differences, and we'll talk through what those differences are at a later in the presentation. But we're first going to start with the Fourth Amendment. So the Fourth Amendment protects your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. So what does a seizure mean in this context? And I'll call on Jeffrey.
It means where your property, your personal property, is actually taken into out of your hands and into their hands.
Exactly, and your body too, right? You're detained, and so searches and seizures is what we're going to speak about today. And so if you could drop it in the chat here, and I'll monitor it. Put A, B, or C and answer in relation to this question. So can a police officer approach you on the street and ask you questions? Put A for yes, always, B for no, never, and C, only if I've done something wrong. Nice. All right. So we got we got a lot of A's, we got a lot of C's. So for those who put C's, you just
like veggies.
What?
Whatever you have at home, Youre sides can turn nutritious veggies into mouth-watering meals. These taste amazing.
All right. I think that was me, y'all. That was my bad. I forgot to close out YouTube. So for those who put C in your question, you just self-incriminated. How do you know if they know you've done something wrong? But the answer is yes, always. That a police officer can approach you on the streets and always talk to you. And they can ask you questions, but you don't have to answer the questions. And so this is accept, and there's two questions that you have to answer from a police officer at any given time in Colorado. And that is two things. The first is that you must tell an officer your correct name and your correct date of birth. So for many students, it can be scary to be in contact with law enforcement and to tell them this information and wanting to talk to them. But it's important that, because you don't know why an officer is stopping you. And so it's important to only give the necessary information that you need to give, and that is your correct name and your correct date of birth. And it's also important to note that you don't want to give your cousin's name. You don't want to give your cousin's birthday or your friend's birthday, because you can be charged with another crime for lying to a police officer. And so this is important that regardless if you may or may not have a warrant, a bench warrant, a warrant out for your arrest, that you always give your correct name and date of birth, because you do not want to add any more criminal charges or any criminal charges to an encounter with law enforcement. And then after providing this information, you want to say, I want to remain silent. And so this is where normally if we were in person, I would have us practice together, because we're not used to saying this, right? We're not used to saying, I want to remain silent, and being affirmative in that statement. And so this is some good practice that actually, why don't we do it? So if you guys can turn off your microphones, and on the count of 3, I want us to all say, I want to remain silent, right? So turn off our mics. There we go. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
I want to remain
silent.
Remain silent.
There you go. It's awkward, isn't it, right, to say that, and it's important to acknowledge it, and also important to know that this is what keeps you safe and tells an officer that I'm exercising my right to remain silent. So with that being said, if a police officer approaches you on the streets, can you stop them? Can they stop you from leaving? So again, in the chat, if you could put A, yes, always, B, no, never, and C, yes, if the officer thinks you have done something wrong. Nice. Okay, so we got a nice mixture. Devin, I think you hit the C. You were very adamant. It's number C. I appreciate it. Okay, so the answer is yes, if the officer thinks you've done something wrong. And here's the kicker is, if you are unsure, if you're unsure why an officer is approaching you, is you have to remember that they're not going to tell you, hey, you may be part of a, they're not going to approach you and say, hey, we think you're a suspect to someone who stole the Snickers at the 7-Eleven down the street, right? They're not going to come up and approach you and tell you that. What they're going to do is like, hey, you know, they're going to approach you and they're going to ask you, where have you been? Were you at the 7-Eleven? They're going to start asking you really preliminary questions of understanding. And so this is where, if you're unsure whether or not you are being detained and if they're starting to interrogate you, then this is where you say, am I free to leave? And you want to say it exactly like this, am I free to leave? Because you're asking them specifically, am I being detained or am I not being detained? And these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, these 5 words. And so why don't we practice this? If you guys can turn off your microphones, and then on the count of 3, we're going to practice, am I free to leave? So 1, 2, 3. Oh, 3.
Am I free to leave?
Oh, that's a beautiful chorus of you exercising your rights. I so love it. I'm here for it, y'all. So yeah, so you're going to want to ask, am I free to leave? And this is where, and if so, you're going to walk away carefully. You're not going to run. You're not going to jog. You're not going to skip. Like, you always want to walk carefully away from a police officer. You don't want to give them any reason to stop you and to detain you. And then after you ask if you're free to leave and an officer says yes, you should walk away carefully. Like I said, if the officer says no, then that means you're being detained and you must stay, and you do not walk away at that point, because that could lead to a very dangerous situation with an officer. And so now this is what we're getting into, and if an officer may ask if they can search you or your backpack or other personal items. So that unreasonable search and seizure that we're talking about. And this is where you say, I do not consent to you searching my stuff. Yes, this is right. Sorry, we used to say I do not consent to you searching me and my stuff, so I got confused for a second. So on the count of 3, let's unmute our mics and we're gonna practice this phrase. I do not consent to you searching my stuff. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
I do not consent to
Searching my stuff.
All right. I appreciate the way we're saying it, but we always want to make sure that when we practice it, whether you're practicing in front of a mirror, I don't recommend this practicing on your parents or your guardians, because that can lead to that's a different scenario here. But I do think that it's important to practice and remember to do it from a very firm stance and firm perspective, and that you're firm in what you're trying to convey to the police officers. So yeah, so I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. Now, the police officer might search you anyway without asking your permission. So what should you do? And this is where you still want to say, I do not consent to you searching me and my stuff. And then this is really important, is that you do not try to physically prevent the search. And this is an unfortunate, and this is where we talk about power dynamics, right? Between you as a young person or even you as an adult, for those who are our adult participants today, is that can lead to an assault on a police officer. There have been cases where someone's accidentally spit and it got on the shoe and that counted against them as an assault on a police officer. Like, you just never know on the way that's going to be interpreted. And so it's important to remember to not physically engage with a police officer, even if they're not respecting your constitutional rights. Because at the end of the day, if our fight, right, as civilians, is going to be in the courtroom with our lawyers. And so if you exercise your constitutional rights when encountering police officers, then we all stand of having a better chance of having a stronger case in court if it ever came to that. Now, this is a really good one. So if you do not consent to a search, is the officer still allowed to search your cell phone? If you think A, yes, B, no, or C, only with the warrant, put it in the chat. We got some B's in there, so we got some no's, we got some only with the warrant. Okay. So the answer is yes, only within a warrant. But if an officer can just see your phone screen, this is not a search. So this is plain view, a very specific law in plain view, where a lot of us have our notifications pops up on our phones, right? And so there have been cases where a notification has popped up on a cell phone and it says, hey, I just stole that Snickers from 7-Eleven, or did you just steal that Snickers from 7-Eleven? And you said yes, and that notification could pop up on the phone. And then if officer sees that, then that leads to incriminating evidence for them to detain you for theft. And so this is where it's important on your cell phones to make sure that your notifications, when they come in, that they're not fully viewable, but that they only can show either that you have notification from a certain person, or that it's specific to the app that you want to log into and look at what the notification is for. And so this is what is recommended. Oops, hold on, where am I? Yes. So that's what's recommended, is because you never want to be in a situation where an officer can see your phone screen and and could see anything incriminating. James, you have a question?
Would you recommend that you take your cell phone and put it in your pocket?
Great question. So if there's the case where you want to pull out your phone and an officer is near you, you're going to want to articulate, I'm going to pull out my cell phone from my pocket. You want to always tell the officer what you're going to do with your hands, because your hands should always be in plain view. That is one thing that the old video that Lyric had really conveyed is that your hands always want to be in plain sight, because an officer can think they're trained to think many different ways in which someone could potentially harm them. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you reach for a phone and an officer thinks you're reaching for a weapon and, can result in something, terrible. So thank you, James, for that question. When can a police officer stop a car you're in? Anyone want to give it a shot? When can an officer stop you that a car you're in?
Tyran raised his hand.
Can you say that again?
Tyran raised his hand. I think he wants to say something.
Oh, yeah. Tyron?
The police can only stop you in their car if they feel that you have done something wrong or you are breaking any of the speed limits or stuff like that.
Yeah, or if you've stolen a car, yes, that's exactly it, right? If they think a crime has been committed or a traffic violation have been committed, is they can stop you in the car. And this what this really is an officer reasonably believes someone in the car has committed a crime or traffic violation. And so what we have seen though is that officers have used traffic violations as an excuse to search a vehicle for more than just the traffic violation that was stopped for, right? And so yes, or you ran a red light. Thank you, Devin. That's super helpful. That's another really good example.
It's
what
Davion.
Should you say? Oh, Davion. Oh, I'm sorry. I appreciate you correcting me on that, Davion. Heck yeah, because I have one of those names too that people always mess up, and I'm just like, I get it. All right. So what should you say if you're pulled over and an officer asks to search your car? All right, who's keeping up here? What do you say?
I do not consent in you searching my stuff.
Dang, Frankie, check you out. Someone's paying attention. Yes, Shelby, I do not consent to you searching my car. I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. That's what you want to say. And remember, you got to stay firm in all of this, right? I do not consent, right? Because you're telling an officer, I know my Fourth Amendment rights, and I am free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and this is an unreasonable search and seizure. What should you do if the police come to your home?
I do not allow you the right to search my stuff.
I do not allow you the right to search my stuff. So first, you want to make sure that you don't open the door, right? Unless you see a warrant. And you can always ask for an officer to hold up a warrant to a window. You can ask them to slide it through the door. But when an officer approaches your home, you never want to open the door. You want to ask them, do you have a warrant? And then that's when you say, I do not consent to you searching my stuff if they don't have a warrant. But if they do have a warrant, the next thing I have to ask you all, especially our young people in the room here, is can your parent or guardian give the police consent to search your room? What do you think? Tyron, you have your hand up.
Yes, your parent can give them consent to search your room. Also, my name is pronounced Miranda.
Oh, I mispronounced your name too?
Yeah, but it's no problem.
No, it's okay. Pronounce it for me again.
Tyran, like a tie and a ran.
Tyran. Okay, Tyran. All right. Cool. Thank you for that. So yes, everybody, you're correct. I see you. I see your posts in the chats as well. So yes, an officer in most situations, your parents or guardian can consent to a search of your bedroom. Now, searches in schools. So this is where it gets a little bit more complicated because usually at the beginning of every school year, your parents sign a bunch of documents, or your parents or guardians sign a bunch of documents that give the schools a lot of power and jurisdiction over your stuff as young people. And so a student can be searched at school if school officials have reasonable grounds to believe there is a violation of a law or school rules. And then, so my question to you all is, what should you say if a principal, a school resource officer, or a police officer wants to search your locker or backpack at school?
Can I talk to my parents?
Man, thank you. You're killing it. I love it. Yes. So that is going to be one thing that you can say. But at the same time, you want to say, I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. Yes. Thank you, Jeffrey. So you can always ask why they're doing so, but you're not exercising your constitutional rights if you ask them why they're doing something, and they don't have to always answer you as well. And so that could be frustrating. So what you can do and what gives you power is by saying, I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment right by saying, I do not consent to you searching me and my stuff. So we're going to take a quick break. I forgot that this was in the slides. Oh, sorry, we have a question. Is it Kai? Okay.
Sorry, I kept my hand.
No question? Okay. All right, cool. So we added this part of the curriculum or into the curriculum because it's important to know that for a lot of our young people across Colorado, especially with the legalization of marijuana over the last 5 years, that what we've seen is an increase of youth involvement in the juvenile justice system because of marijuana. And so we want our young people in particular to know what you need to know around marijuana. And so my first question is for you all is, when is a young person allowed to possess marijuana?
21.
Okay, now you gotta pronounce your name for me. Tashla. I'm messing it up.
Tashyla.
Tashyla. Oh, that's a beautiful name. Tashyla. Okay. So we have
Thank
never,
you.
we have medical, we have 18 years old, we have 21 years old. So it is never legal for anyone under the age of 21 to buy, possess, or use retail marijuana, and retail stores can lose their license for selling marijuana to anyone underage. What happens if a juvenile is caught possessing marijuana is a young person can be charged with a minor in possession of offense and could face fines, community service, loss of driver's license, criminal convictions. It can mess up your ability to apply for financial aid and pay for college or trade school later on in life. So there's that. And then what other offenses can a young person be charged of involved in marijuana? And there's also driving under the influence of drugs. So DUID, if a young person is found driving a vehicle with 5 nanograms of THC per millimeter of blood, which isn't a whole lot, which applies to retail or medical marijuana. So even if someone has access to medical marijuana, they should not be operating a vehicle. So that's something that most people may not be aware of. What happens if an adult gives marijuana to a juvenile or to a young person, and that adult can be charged with a felony offense called contributing to the delinquency of a minor for giving marijuana to a young person. And this one is huge because this is where I think a lot of young folks see the main impact of if someone is caught possessing marijuana at school, there are additional consequences for having marijuana at school. And that is drug counseling, getting kicked off sports, suspension, expulsion, charged as a criminal offense, and adults could face civil or criminal penalties. All right, any questions about our little segue to talk about marijuana law? Okay. Now we're going to talk about, oh yeah, go for it.
Wait, what if, can't you be like subscribe me? So I forgot what it's called. Like when the doctor gives it to you.
Yeah, it could be medical marijuana. That's medical marijuana. But there's still a lot of rules around the ways in which it can be used and when it can be used.
Oh, okay. So like you can't really, so like if the doctors gave it to you and you get caught with it, you still get in trouble, or they just give you like a warning, like stay home with it?
So my recommendation would be that parents should inform the schools if their child is taking CBD or medical marijuana. And if that's the case, which I think is really rare, then you want to inform school officials. And then also the school will probably ask that the medical marijuana or the CBD is distributed through the nurse's office or at home before school hours or after school hours. So that's just my guess, but that's something that I can also look into for you all if you're curious and knowing more.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, now we're going to go into our Fifth Amendment here, and that's the right to remain silent. The Fifth Amendment gives you the right to remain silent. You do not have to talk to police or answer their questions. So no matter what they say, no matter how intimidating the officers may be, you do not have to answer her or his questions. However, what we've seen is 90% of you choose to waive their right to remain silent. That means they choose to talk. So why do you think you choose to talk?
I would think that most students or any child would choose to talk because, first of all, like the police is a law enforcement, and most of people sometimes learn about how if a police comes up to you, you need to answer them, but most people don't have like a choice to choose of whether they can, and not many people know about the Fifth Amendment, I think.
Yeah, the pressure of choice, right? Deborah, you said that too, is they don't have the choice. And Jeffrey, it's natural to feel like you want to help. And Shelby, exactly, it's intimidation, fear, plea deals, right? I mean, our criminal justice system is riddled with plea deals. And yeah, Deborah, that's true. Is for a lot of our young people, and even for adults, right, who may be innocent, they say like, oh, I have nothing to hide. So like, why not talk to a police officer? Well, the thing is, like, you don't know why a police officer is talking to you. And so that leads into our Miranda rights. And so who knows your Miranda rights? Who watches, raise of hands, who watches like crime shows where they say the Miranda rights? Some of you are like not big crime show people. All right.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And I don't remember the rest.
That's not bad. Nice. So exactly, you have the right
And
to
then
remain
they
silent.
said you can be, they get an attorney for you. They said
You have a right to an attorney, and there's one more. And then if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. So that's our public defender. So exactly. So good job, y'all. So you know your Miranda rights, or at least you have a good idea of what they are. So with our Miranda rights, so my question is, when does an officer have to read you your Miranda rights?
When you're being arrested.
When you're being arrested? Okay, on arrest. So a lot of it beforehand, when they put cuffs on you prior to taking you into custody. Okay, so actually you guys are wrong. Because that's what we see, right, in television, right? Is like when you're getting arrested, they're putting you in the cop car, they start reading your Miranda rights, when actually you could be detained and they don't have to read your Miranda rights because they're not interrogating you. So you have to have two things that happen at the same time. You have to be detained or in custody, and they have to be interrogating you for them to read you your Miranda rights. So custody means under arrest, or you feel like you're under arrest, and interrogation means questioning by law enforcement. And so and that's why it's important to ask, am I free to leave, or I want to remain silent, because you may be confused about what step in the process that you may be under or in when talking to a police officer. And so once you ask, am I free to leave, and they say no, that means you may be in custody. And if you're underneath custody, then they may not start interrogating you until later on, which means they don't have to read your Miranda rights until that point.
Excuse me, Gianna.
Yeah.
But they can also start questioning you, interrogating you before they take you to the police station. A lot of people think that that's when they're starting to interrogate. They can interrogate you still while they're in the field. So you're right on both those, but I thought you might want to mention, or have the other law student or the law person mention, that interrogation could take places not just when they put you in the police car, or when they take you to the station.
Yeah, no, thank you, James. That's a really valuable point, and that interrogation can happen at any point and anywhere. And that's why we always say, if an officer starts asking you questions, it doesn't matter if you did something wrong, doesn't matter if you did something, right, it just doesn't matter. You always want to say, I want to remain silent. And then it's also, someone already mentioned this in the chat, and I forgot who, I'm sorry. But police are legally allowed to lie to you, and you always want your lawyer there as a protection. So let's practice, I want to remain silent, because I think this is really important. I don't recommend you using this with your parents or your guardians, but I definitely recommend you practicing them at some point. And so on the count of 3, I want you to unmute your mics, and I want us to say, I want to remain silent. So 1, 2, 3.
I want
to remain silent. Beautiful. I love that chorus of exercise your constitutional rights. I'm here for it. And so, yes, I want to remain silent. If you're being interrogated by an officer, for young people, and this is where young people rights differ, is like if you are 17 years of age and younger, you can always ask for your parent or guardian. And so, and it's required by Colorado law for parents to be present. And so, and there's been a few cases where that hasn't been the case, but as a young person, you can say, I want my parent and I want my lawyer. And then say, I want to remain silent. So remember, so these are the 5 phrases, right, that we're going over. For a young person, you know, I want my parent. And then it's also important to know that what you tell your parents can be used against you in the court of law, what you tell anybody. So like, say, for example, I stole that Snickers at 7-Eleven and I decided to tell my best friend that I stole that Snickers. Well, now if I get arrested for allegedly stealing that Snickers, I am now, you know, in the courtroom, and the prosecutors have petitioned for my best friend to come and testify against me. And so that's important to note, that the only person trusted, whether you may have done something wrong, whether you did not do something wrong, it doesn't matter. The only person you want to talk to is your lawyer. And that is whether it's your private lawyer, whether it's one that's appointed to you by the Colorado Public Defender's Office. And we have a really good public defender's office in Colorado. And that is our 6th Amendment right, is our right to an attorney. If you are being charged with a crime, the only person you should talk to about what happened is your lawyer, and you want to say, I want a lawyer. So on the count of 3, we're going to say, I want a lawyer. So 1, 2, 3.
I want a lawyer.
Yes, I want a lawyer. That's great. So yeah, so all 5 of the phrases are, am I free to leave? If so, you walk away carefully. Number 2 is, I want to remain silent. Number 3 is, I want a lawyer. Number 4 is, I want my parent. And number 5 is, I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. So these are 5 phrases that you should say to a police officer whenever you encounter them, whether that's at school, out on the streets, or in your home, or in a car. These are what you can say that's going to protect you, and that articulates to the officers that you know your constitutional rights, you know how to exercise them, and you know how to make sure that this power dynamic changes from them having all the power to them having less power in that situation. So any questions? We have about a minute for questions.
I have a quick question. So if someone says those things and the officer persists, what should they do?
So remember, it's all about not being physically confrontational with officers, right? Because as we say, you don't want to catch another case, right? You want to give them the correct information that they need with your correct name, your correct date of birth, and then you want to exercise these constitutional rights. And if the officer still persists, then you wait until you talk to your lawyer and you tell them what happened, because that gives you a stronger case in court for your lawyer to argue against dismissing the case or throwing out evidence, etc.
Thank you.
Sorry, y'all. I'm trying to stop share. Any other questions?
Fabulous job, Gianina. It was excellent. Thank you.
Of course. And so with this presentation, you know, I'm not a lawyer by trade. I'm an activist. I'm a community member who's passionate about making sure we know our constitutional rights when encountering police officers, because we know the violence that happens out on the streets between communities of color and police officers. And I also want to say that if you all do have questions that a lawyer can answer, I'm more than happy to connect you with the right people to make sure that we are able to get you the resources that you need. And again, the Colorado Public Defender's Office is amazing across Colorado. And so they're a really good resource off the bat I can think of. But I just want to say thank you all so much for giving me this opportunity to come and present to you.
Thank you so much, Gianina. We so appreciate you and your expertise. So yeah, I see James giving a clap. Can everyone just give her a quick round of applause, or can put up your little happy hands? But thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing about our constitutional rights so that people know what their rights are so that they can exercise them appropriately. So now I'd like to go into announcing our Q2 winner. So we had a competition for Q2. So over the last 3 months, we had put out a prompt, and the prompt was interview someone who doesn't look like you and share about the interview and what you learned in the PowerPoint presentation. When we say doesn't look like you, we mean they can be older, younger, different race, a different gender, come from a different socioeconomic status, etc. And so the winner is going to receive a $1,000 family support scholarship to use how they see fit, which is pretty awesome, and also a family kit with a 4-pack of diversity, equity, and inclusion books to continue this learning at home. So I'm going to have all of you help me with a drum roll so that we can announce our winner. So can I get a drum roll from everybody? Perfect. All right, perfect. Thank you guys. And our winner is Sherelle Bethel.